Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar titled Threat Intelligence is Vital to Data Protection and Malware Mitigation. My name is Lucy Buckley and I'm the online event coordinator here at ISACA. We have a great presentation in store for you thanks to our sponsor, Infoblox. Before we get started, I'd like to go through a few quick tips. You have two audio options. One is to listen over your computer speakers. Two, you may dial in at any time using the numbers and codes listed to the left. Please note, if you dial in, there might be a slight delay as the slides advance. All ISACA members can receive 1 CPE credit for viewing today's webinar. If you are watching this event live, you must complete 3 checkpoints. These will pop up on your screen. Simply click OK that appears. If you are watching the recorded version of this event, your progress is being tracked. You must watch it from the beginning to the very end. After completing this webinar, you can receive your CPE certificate by visiting the transcript page within your My Learning portal. Please remember that it takes 24 hours for the CPE credit to appear in your ISACA profile. We made a job aid that goes over these steps in more detail. Click on the Papers tab to learn more or to download a PDF of today's presentation. Our speaker will be conducting a Q&A session towards the end of the event, so if at any point you have a question, please click on the Q&A tab. If at any time you need technical support, please access the Help tab. Finally, if you have any questions about the CPE submission process or suggestions regarding our webinar series, please visit support.isaca.org. And now I'm very excited to be introducing our speaker for today, Sam Kumarsamy. Sam is currently working in security product marketing at Infoblox. He has 10+ years of experience in marketing with Fortune 100 companies such as Cisco, Blue Coat, Citrix, Checkpoint, and as well as VC-funded security startups. He has launched several disruptive products, services, and solutions globally, both directly to the customer as well as through channels. Most recently, he was the Global Security Marketing Consultant at Cisco, helping the integration and go-to marketing plans and execution for security acquisitions such as Open DNS and Landcope. Sam has an MBA from WP Carey School of Business at Arizona State University and a BS in Engineering from India. Now let's get started. Sam, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you so much, Lucy. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are. Welcome to this webinar. I'm really, really excited to be presenting today. And the first, before I get started, I want to go over the agenda. The agenda first is I'm going to talk about threat landscape challenges, some of the challenges that most of the organizations face today, because security breaches are happening on a weekly basis. It used to be monthly, but now almost on a weekly basis you hear some kind of breach happening. And so I'm going to talk about more from a DNS or domain name system perspective, how security around DNS is so very critical. Talk about the best practices for data protection and malware mitigation. So how can you protect your organizations from malware, the communications with command and control sites, the bad sites, the bad neighborhoods, and also how you can protect your data from exfiltration. Your sensitive data, you don't want to lose it to the bad guys because they can be very, very harmful. And then talk about how Infoblox, the company that I work for, actually has products around data protection and malware mitigation, and we follow best practices. And then talk about possible next steps on how you can probably evaluate some of Infoblox's products. So I want to talk about the kill chain. The kill chain is basically a 7-stage process or model that cyber criminals use to get to their victims. I think many of you have probably read or have heard about it. It is really something that was developed by Lockheed Martin, the company, the defense company, and I believe it came from the U.S. Air Force or Army, one of those segments of the U.S. Air Forces, perhaps, I don't know, but it's a 7-stage process that is a defense mechanism, basically how to stop the bad guys. But it is what the criminals are using, this 7-stage process to kind of get into your organization and exfiltrate sensitive information, or even plant malware within your company if you're an organization, small, medium, or large. So the 7 stages are, and the idea here is to show you or visually indicate to you how DNS plays an important factor. It needs to be protected. So, for example, the reconnaissance is where people harvest email addresses, or especially conference information. If you're attending a conference, people get to that sensitive information. They kind of look for loopholes. That is what is regarded as reconnaissance. Then how to weaponize, once they get through, they do this reconnaissance and find out, hey, they get hold of your email, they weaponize your email. Perhaps they load it up with some phishing software or a website. They force you to click on it, and they deliver. They weaponize the email, send it to you, but basically, and once it's delivered to you, they expect you to click on it, and there goes. You're infected. That's one way of looking at it. There's also another way, stage number 4 here I'm talking about, is exploitation. Exploitation is basically looking for vulnerabilities within your system. It could be software, your OS, your DNS or domain name system. So let me explain what DNS is. DNS stands for domain name system. It is basically a product that serves, it's a server that serves as a internet phone book. So basically when you type www.yahoo.com or google.com, what happens is DNS converts it into an IP address so that you can go access that particular site. So it's done very transparently, so you don't see the IP address. You just see, hey, you type yahoo.com and transparently you get to the site. That is that, the whole matching of the URL to the IP address that's done by the domain name system. And it's an important protocol and a threat vector as well, and I'll talk to you about it, because if you just protect your email or web traffic, that is not enough. Your DNS needs to be protected as well. So back to this conversation on exploitation. So the bad guys are always looking for vulnerabilities within your system, be it software, applications, your DNS system, because even DNS has vulnerabilities within its software. If you're not patched it properly, then people can find a loophole, and what I call as the DNS blind spot, because you're not aware of that particular vulnerability in the software. So that can be exploited, and people can install malware, via that vulnerability. They get to your endpoint systems, install malware, and then that malware will end up, dormant. It could be dormant or immediately start communicating with the bad neighborhoods or bad malicious sites. They could be, bad sites that are looking to exfiltrate data. So the actions or objectives could be handing of the keyboard, and they accomplish the original goal might be to exfiltrate sensitive data. So that malware will be sitting dormant, for example, and probably even propagate laterally, meaning it will infect more than one device, moving horizontally within your organization, getting to the different devices, and then communicating sensitive, not communicating to CNC, not only communicating, but also sending sensitive information. And all that DNS in various stages can be used in any of these 7-stage process. That's what I want to indicate here. There's protocol anomalies, there's what you call as DNS tunneling, so you can use some known tools to exfiltrate data internally from within your devices to command and control sites or the bad sites. So that's the 7-stage process, again defined by Lockheed Martin, and these are the 7 processes or models through which the bad guys get to organizations. They're basically looking for loopholes, and DNS happens to be one of the blind spots. Now, given that DNS, I just indicated to you, DNS is often ignored threat vector, and guess what? Several surveys have been done about identifying the leading culprit in data exfiltration. Data exfiltration means basically sending out sensitive information from within your organization to a bad guy's site or computer or whatever the case may be. $4 million is the average consolidated cost of a data breach, according to a survey done by Ponemon Institute back in 2016. 46% of survey respondents said that they experienced some sort of a DNS data exfiltration. So DNS is being used as a means to exfiltrate data, not just your web traffic or your email, but actually DNS. DNS is an important system to be protected, or server to be protected at the DNS control plane. So that's very, very important, because 46% of the companies have experienced some sort of a data exfiltration. And 45% have experienced some form of DNS tunneling. Tunneling meaning that known signatures, so you have like split brain, some tools are used to exfiltrate data. So those are known signatures, you can actually block them if you know about them. Okay, so that's another way of exfiltrating data internally as well. So data can be embedded in DNS queries. So that's another thing to watch out for. You know, you have the DNS queries and responses coming. They got to be monitored, because, you know, sensitive data can be sent out through DNS queries. And what about malware proliferation using DNS? 91% of malware users say DNS was used to carry out the campaign, or malware uses DNS. So, you know, again, these are surveys done by basically Cisco did this survey, and they have clearly indicated that malware uses DNS. So it's a very, you know, one of the most often used threat vector to send out malware or malware propagation to CNC sites, right? And 431 million unique pieces of malware were found in 2015. And it's the number one CNC responsible vector for crimeware. So again, all the more reason to protect your DNS and prevent malware propagation via DNS, okay? And intruders do rely on DNS to infect devices. So that's been established given the survey results and so on. So for those of you who thought, hey, I have a firewall or email gateway or web gateway, that is sufficient. Why do I need to protect my DNS? Well, here's the reason why you should, and think about it. Now, I talked about people communicating to bad sites. How do organizations know about bad sites? This is where threat intelligence comes into play. Threat intelligence is basically a stream of data, a continuous live stream of data that provides you information of current and potential threats to the security of an organization. So simply put, it is your malicious IP addresses, domain names, URLs, host names, bad email addresses, and so on. That information needs to be current, updated, validated, curated, and make sure they're very current, because if it's expired, then maybe that you're blocking a good IP address. So that's why threat intelligence is so important. And we conducted a survey conducted by Infoblox from a best practices perspective. We actually conducted a survey through Ponemon to find out how many people are adopting threat intelligence within a company, meaning using that database of IP addresses and so on, you know, malicious IP addresses. Now, there are several sources of that. You know, I need to inform you. So there are companies such as Serble, Farsight, you know, where they provide you newly observed domains that are coming on and will let you know if they're good or bad. There are companies such as CrowdStrike, Proofpoint, all providing that information. Then there is also government providing that information. Government is starting to share their threat intelligence with the commercial companies or organizations, you know, with private companies as well, because they realize in order to stop the bad guys, we all need to partner and collaborate from a threat intelligence perspective. So that information about the bad guys' sites, IP addresses, URLs, host names, domain names should be shared, and it needs to be current and validated that they are the most relevant for your organization. The problem when we conducted that survey, or Ponemon conducted that survey, they indicated that 70% of the respondents felt that the threat intelligence is not timely. And timely meaning, it has to come on time and it has to be current, because otherwise, just like I mentioned, if the domain or the URLs have expired, there is a term called time to live. If they have expired, then then it might be a false positive, meaning that a good site might be deemed as bad because that time frame of where that validation is probably expired, and so it might be a good site and you're deeming it as bad site. So that is important to keep it very timely, and that's the reason why many organizations are saying it's ineffective because it's not timely. They also said that they need to prioritize it by category. Category meaning, is it a malware? Is it ransomware? Is it bogon? Is it a certain category? Like I said, malware, and within that, is it a CNC site, for example? Is the malware coming from a command and control site? That is category. And then category can also boil down into classes and properties. As I mentioned, malware command and control site would be a class. Property would be, hey, yes, it's coming from a CNC site, but is it really bad? Is it really sending out sensitive information? That's where you should be able to double click on it and find out, hey, is that malware actually some form of a malware called, for example, rabbit malware, which is really, really critical, vicious to an organization because it can send out sensitive information, for example. So that's what I mean by you need to get into that level of detail, and that's where the curation and validation is required. So it's not just a matter of getting those bad domain names, IP addresses, and so on, and just applying it to your organization. While that might be effective, but remember, you need to validate it, make sure there are no false positives, and perhaps be able to categorize it as well. The third point is threat intelligence when applied, you got to make sure it's actionable. And it needs to have context. Context meaning, okay, have organizations seen that particular IP address before? Is it really deemed critical, like I mentioned? Is it coming from Russia, for example, a rogue nation? I'm not saying all Russian sites are bad. I'm just saying, has it got a history? You need to be able to take a snapshot at that particular point in time and look at perhaps a threat investigation database, for example, to find out if other companies have experienced that particular IP address which has caused tremendous harm, so that has been blacklisted. So you want to take a look at it, looking at perhaps your threat investigation tool. So all that people said is why threat intelligence is ineffective, and in order to be effective, it's lacking all these features, and I just indicated to you what is the means of having effective threat intelligence. And again, quickly going through this slide, basically what happens is I told you, people think intrusion prevention systems, next generation firewalls, secure web gateways, secure email gateways, all these traditional perimeter security products, while they're very essential because they do inspect web and email traffic and block any malicious traffic coming through them, they do not look at DNS traffic. So DNS needs its own set of protection, if you will. And that is why there is a security gap that really exists between the time a malware initiates communication via DNS, for example, using what I call as the DNS control plane, and that is what I also call as the DNS blind spot that needs to be addressed as soon as possible. So you basically, in addition to that email and web traffic layer of security, you also need a DNS security layer in order to ensure complete protection of your sensitive data, as well as to prevent malware communication with CMC sites or command and control sites, what I call as the bad sites. So that's where the solution that you really need is a comprehensive, holistic data protection and malware mitigation solution. Because guess what? If your if your sensitive data is being exfiltrated, and that is this malware is enabling that by communicating with bad sites, it's going to cause brand damage, financial loss, because your sensitive information, your customers are going to sue you, and that's the legal exposure, as well as you're going to lose the customer because he's going to go to another company that's going to ensure that his sensitive information doesn't get leaked or communicating with a command and control site. So what is really required is disruption of the cyber kill chain. So that kill chain is that 7-stage process I just talked to you about, or the model. So at each stage, you can actually kill that particular communication if you can, and protection at all those levels are required. So block malware communication at DNS control plane. Enforce policy with the most latest up-to-date threat intelligence. As I mentioned to you, you want to make that threat intelligence, you want to curate it, validate it, make sure it is not in silos because each department is consuming it in their own way. For example, that's another reason why the threat intelligence is not effective. You want to protect users both on and off-prem. So that's another thing you want to really look for as an organization, because some organizations are just on-prem, haven't made the move to the cloud. But as you know, many organizations today are making that move to the cloud because they're feeling more secure, or some of them might have a hybrid approach. Some of their key applications and data they want to leave on-prem, and some they want to move in the cloud. So you want to be able to protect all that data as well, and as well as your users, by the way, they happen to be on-prem as well as off-prem, meaning working remotely or from your branch offices and so on. So you want to protect them as well. And you want to really accelerate remediation by integrating with the ecosystem. So no one vendor can solve all of your problems. You might hear companies saying things like security everywhere, or we have the one end-to-end solution. But many of the customers know that they typically like to use best of breed and to protect or protect their organizations from the bad guys or the hackers. They typically want to apply various layers of defense, and typically you want to kind of implement solutions from more than one vendor. And the reason for that is if the hackers get through one vendor's products, at least the next vendor's products might be able to block that. So that's typically what I call as best of breed. And so integrating with the ecosystem, whatever information you have, if you can share and apply that to other third-party tools as well, then you're holistically improving the security posture and the situational awareness of your organization. Data exfiltration prevention. You want to really stop DNS-based data exfiltration. And also some of the zero-day threats using machine learning and analytics. And I'll talk a little more in detail about that, because it's not only just stopping the bad reputation or the signatures, as I talked about, some of the tools used in data exfiltration, but it's also using real-time streaming, because DNS can be used as a protocol to exfiltrate data. People are able to send data via responses to DNS queries, and you need to be able to inspect the DNS traffic and stop them. And for that, typically, if you have a tool or a means of using machine learning and analytics, you can stop and look at some of those sensitive information that are being sent out. And what if they're going to a site if they're not that has not been deemed as a bad site? You need to be able to detect that as well, and really be able to scale this data exfiltration prevention by providing the analytics both on-prem, because some companies don't want to send the data for analysis to the cloud. They want to really prevent data exfiltration by having something on-prem versus sending it to the cloud. The advantage of in the cloud is basically being able to scale, because you're not limited by the size of an appliance that you're placing for to do the analysis to prevent data exfiltration. If you put it in the cloud, obviously you're able to scale. But again, there are companies that have policies that are not going to allow that to happen because they don't want to put data in the cloud. And last but not the least is visibility. You cannot protect what you cannot see. So you do need to have a proper discovery tool, not just doing the network topology, but actually looking at, what are the different ports, what are different VLANs, for example, getting and having visibility into the infected endpoints, whether they are remote or on-prem, and having that context, where is that device, who accessed that device, the IP address, and the user access. You need all that network context in order to prioritize, okay, it is this user who is accessing that infected endpoint, and something is going on because that user is sending out sensitive information. So that is the context that you can gain from looking at all the devices, whether they are hybrid, whether they are in the cloud, on-prem, all that. You need to be able to discover the various devices and really compare and make sure they're compliant with the policies so that you ensure that no breach is happening. That is what I mean by data protection and malware mitigation as a best practice. So there are solutions. You want to look at solutions that proactively contain malware and stop data exfiltration using DNS. I talked a little bit about you need to stop at the DNS control plane without any agents, being able to stop that both in the cloud as well as on-prem, depending what your architecture is. And you need to be able to prevent data exfiltration using machine learning. So again, look for tools, best practices that provide all these features, if you will, when you look for it, depending how your organization is. And I talked about threat intelligence being siloed. Different organizations are using threat intelligence differently. They don't talk to each other. An example being large companies where the network team is subscribing for their own threat intelligence, which is, I indicated to you, the IP addresses, URLs, the bad IP addresses, malicious URLs, and so on, including email addresses, so on. It would be nice to have it at a central platform that can ingest the threat feeds for the entire organization, right? Not just in various departments, because it's ineffective and they don't talk to each other. What happens is threat intelligence is not centralized, and each one is looking at it from their own perspective, and the organization as a whole does not benefit from it. So you need to be able to view it holistically, aggregate that data, validate that data, and make sure there are no false positives. Add additional information, such as I talked to you about class, the different classes and properties. If you can add, like saying, if this malware is effective, so that helps you prioritize and set context. And also some sort of a reporting tool where you can look at historically what's happening, what are the bad sites, what are the bad devices, bad username, top clients that are or top addresses that are infecting your devices, and having that leverage to look at information historically. So some sort of a reporting and analytics tool to give you that insight into customized reporting is also good. And you need to have that report which will perhaps consolidate both your on-prem and in the cloud environment. So you want to have, like, if you have devices both on-prem and in the cloud, you want to actually, users that is, you want to have a unified policy for that. And really ecosystem integrations is the last component, is having all this information, context, and applying it to your entire organization so that this information, context, any DNS indicators of compromise should be able, you should be able to share as a company with other the tool that you choose should be able to integrate with other third parties as well, because like the SIEM, because that's where perhaps you want to monitor your entire organization's threats or events or logs in one single location. So it's important to have this particular, when you look for the data protection and malware mitigation, is look at a tool that will integrate, have open APIs, for example, that can put it in various formats as CSV, set format, common event format, JSON, XML, sticks format, and so on, so that you can integrate it and look at it holistically from an organizational perspective. Again, these are some of the best practices for data protection and malware mitigation. When you look for the threat detection, look for some unique, there are so many tools out there which will say, yes, they will prevent threat detection and malware mitigation via DNS. Look for some, from a best practices perspective, you want to look at it from three angles. One is the reputation, that is command and control sites, known command and control sites, the known bad neighborhoods. And I talked about it. That's where the threat intelligence comes into play, where you're looking at malicious IP addresses, URL, domain names, and host names. Having that information current, validated, global perspective, refreshed as soon as possible or as quickly as possible, all that you need to look at. From a signature, this is where you have to do some deep packet inspection, look for any tools, known tools that are exfiltrating data. Split brain comes into mind as a tool that is used for data exfiltration. So that is known, having that knowledge about known signatures can help you prevent data exfiltration via DNS. The last but not the least, but a very important component is behavioral analytics. Look for behavior. Is a particular endpoint device suddenly encrypting the data before communicating with the site? Now that site may not be deemed as malicious, but somehow it's a new site. So you look for that trend because you have a normalized behavior for that device, but suddenly it's starting to encrypt the data and send it out. You should be able to look at the traffic, the DNS traffic. Why are people and make sure no sensitive data is being sent out. So machine learning comes into play because you're looking at some patterns of data being sent out. Is this text being sent out? That is how you can even prevent data from going to unknown sites. That's what we mean by zero-day detecting and preventing zero-day data exfiltration. So being able to detect and prevent that sensitive information being sent out through DNS traffic, which is response and queries, or queries and responses, I should say, is also a very, very important component and a best practice. So best practice should typically look at all these three methods to ensure, pretty much close to 100% prevention of data exfiltration via DNS. So look for a tool that will provide you these three components as well for the prevention of data exfiltration. Consolidated threat intelligence, I talked about, having it in a single platform where you can ingest information from the various sources, be it government, be it open source, be it third-party subscription, or your own internal threat intelligence that you gain from your own knowledge about your networks or your clients' networks, should all be able to be consolidated, best practice again, in a single location. That'll require some work because typically companies have silos of information. You need a champion in order to sponsor that and say, preach the good habits of good hygiene of having a single platform to consolidate all that information. That also eliminates conflicts between sources. You don't want the networking guy looking at their own threat intelligence, your security guys. This enables you to bridge those silos, if you will, by having the threat intelligence in a central location. And then you'll have higher rates of accuracy because you're looking at it from a holistic perspective, and you're applying, as a company, you're applying the knowledge and the ability to validate, curate it, and make sure there are no false positives. So you're also ensuring efficient use of resources by consolidating the threat intelligence within your organization on a single platform. Again, this is back to that, it's all about to operationalize your threat intelligence data. So out of the box, you want to make sure you're taking that information, consolidating it, validating it, and then being able to, and then Infoblox, I put Infoblox up here because that's one of the ways we actually pride ourselves in following best practices, because we have a platform that will actually enable you to do that, ingest information from all sorts of third parties, including open source, government data, for example, Department of Homeland Security's automated indicator sharing information that can be shared as well with third-party vendors' information. So, like I said, it's all about partnership, collaboration. We all need to join together as a best practice in order to share whatever information we have to stop the bad guys, because otherwise the bad guys are always ahead of us. So I think we need to pool our combined resources from a best practices perspective and share that information with third-party vendors as well. So as an organization, you can improve your security posture and situational awareness and be ready and be more proactive about preventing data breaches or hacker attacks, if you will. This is how, from a high level, the threat intelligence should look like. If you look at threat intelligence across your, this is just a pictorial view. Being, again, vendor agnostic, having as a single platform where you ingest information from, say, even Infoblox, it can be your own organization, for example. So I talked about the government agencies now sharing information, like the Department of Homeland Security's automated indicator sharing, because they share their threat intelligence so that then, if all of them indicate that there's a certain IP that is bad, then for sure you have validation from more than one vendor saying it is bad. The marketplace is all third party. You can take it from Serbo, from Farsight, for example. PhishMe shares information. So all that is available on a subscription basis. And being able to ingest and consume and aggregate that information in a central location enables you to validate and, even if you have your own cyber threat intelligence team, in order to be able to validate that and ensure there are no false positives, right? And then any type of open source based threat intelligence can also be leveraged. And I indicate to you, you can put it all in various formats, CSV, and apply it to your third-party vendors like firewall, email, gateway, your DNS firewall, for example, because DNS firewall specifically prevents communication via malware propagation via CNC sites. And then I talked to you a little bit about that you can provide context as well through a central investigation tool that provides you a snapshot of historical information about, blacklists, for example, an IP address, as I mentioned to you. Is it coming from Russia? Does it belong to a particular hacker? You can boil it down to an email address, for example. So having that context to prioritize, so if you know that is the particular IP address, that's the first one you want to apply to your SEM or whatever the case may be, and let them know. Prioritization of these events and threats is extremely important. Otherwise, your SEM is overloaded and they have to do more work in filtering. So what, for example, your threat intelligence platform should be able to do is, by leveraging this threat investigation tool, is to prioritize that the most critical threats that people have to address or your organization has to address, so that it gives you that incident, hastens your incident response. So the result is really about aggregating your threat intelligence management, threat prioritization. I just talked to you how that can be done by adding context. If a particular IP address is coming from Russia or China or wherever it is, and it has been deemed as malicious by your threat investigation tool, which has been blacklisted, then you can prioritize that. And overall, threat intelligence is about improving the security posture, and it also means preventing malware propagation and preventing data exfiltration as well. So how does threat intel provide the most value? Highly accurate wide coverage, provides context enabling security focus to focus on most critical indicators. I just talked through that. Deletion of outdated threat intelligence using time to live. So time to live is there's a certain expiration date for each IP each deemed malicious website, whether it's an IP address, URL, and so on. Time to live is a period where for sure it is going to be deemed as bad, because I talked about refreshing the data constantly. If you don't, then it becomes a false positive because that URL may not anymore be a malicious URL. So deletion of that is important when you look at threat intelligence and making sure it is within that time frame for it to be effective. The single source of truth is nothing but the central location of the threat management platform, because you can enforce policies for the entire organization, improve incident response, because I told you you can prioritize the threats and actually push it to third party, making sure those most critical threats are addressed as soon as possible. And then you're using the blacklisted domains to easily find in your threat investigation tool. You know, the Infoblox's threat investigation tool happens to be called Dossier. That's why I included the name Dossier. And then being able to digest information from various threat intelligence partners. I talked about taking the subscription from third parties, from government data, open source, your own threat intelligence that you happen to discover or determine from your own internal clients and so on, should also be able to be leveraged within your platform and output that in various formats, API formats or application programming interface. Just quickly on the signature-based detection, stop known tunnels. I told you, bypassing the DNS security, client-side tunneling program, from a remote user side, they can use DNS queries to exfiltrate data by using some known tools such as Iodine, Ozyman DNS, Split Brain, DNS to TCP. So, via DNS, they can use protocols such as SSH or web within DNS to propagate traffic, right? Using these tools, known tools. This is, again, the signatures of these tools, if you know them. And that's why I said, the means of stopping data exfiltration is reputation, signature-based, and this is the example of the signature-based data exfiltration detection that you can do using that you need to look for as well, in addition to reputation. And of course, the behavioral analytics is the other component that I'll be talking to as well. So this is the behavioral-based detection. I talked to you about, looking at data, what data is being sent out using the DNS protocol. Is data being sent out using the DNS queries? They can be sent out in chunks, and being able to detect that, you need the capability of behavioral analytics, using lexicon terms or dictionary terms such as, does a U follow P and so on. So that kind of machine learning comes into play to detect zero-day DNS-based data exfiltration in real time. I told you, you need to look at, hey, is data being encrypted all of a sudden and being sent out? That should say, your behavioral analytics could detect that and inform you, hey, there's something going on. You need to inspect the traffic more carefully. And, and whether you want to put this analysis on-prem, where you have some limitations, because, you're limited by the size of the appliance when you're doing this versus sending it to the cloud. Also look for some additional detection. Are they able to detect additional threats, such as DNS messenger, DGA, domain-generated algorithm, or fast flux? So these are some of the newest type of threats that you can detect as well in terms of data exfiltration and also malware mitigation. So really being able to do that and scaling it in the cloud, again, you need to look at from an organizational perspective. Obviously, doing this analysis in the cloud is more scalable and gives you better detection capabilities, additional detection capabilities. And really integrating all this information with your grid, which is your DNS, DHCP, and IPAM or IP address management is important as well, because having that context, I talked to you, the network context, having that visibility into what's happening within your DDI infrastructure, you can apply that context and then prioritize as well. Hey, there is this particular IP address. I know whose machine that is, who is accessing it. So you can kind of drill down into the details in detection of any type of malware that's going on within your company. And then last but then not the least is I'll talk to you about the ecosystem integrations with security vendors. So having a platform that integrates out of the box with your third party can actually accelerate remediation of all these threats. So I talked to you about, highly about, having this DDI infrastructure where you can actually control, secure, and analyze the data. So having information about your DDI or DNS, DHCP, and IP management, and using this actionable network intelligence, because you have nuggets of information about your DDI infrastructure. That is because you're doing the IP management, so you know the IP addresses, whom they've been allocated to, who is using it, and if a device is infected, who is it accessing, when was it infected. All that information, you can take it and point it as DNS indicators of compromise and share that with third parties such as these. And I'm just naming a few vendors here, but being able to take that information and putting it into various formats like REST API, STIX format, and other third-party protocols, is very, very important, because that's when you're able to send that information and you have this open platform that you're able to improve the security posture and the situational awareness of your entire organization by sharing this information. For example, you can kick off a scan within Qualys when you know a particular device has come on, a new device has come on board into your network, and you can kick off a scan. So that's kind of automation and operations that you need to see, orchestration and operations that you need to automate as much as possible in order to be more effective. And that can be done as well in order to prevent data exfiltration and malware mitigation. Also being able to use that historical DNS data for security and troubleshooting. If you're using it, you can send the data and share that data with the cloud and so on as well. That is important, and being able to share that uniformly. The other thing is visualize your network clearly. I talked about network discovery, being able to discover your network from a topology perspective, looking at IP management, and having a single consolidated database of your IP addresses. Every IP address, switch port information, VLAN information, port configuration, the different ports within your network, all that being consolidated into an authoritative database is very, very important, because as I said, you cannot fix what you cannot see. Being able to discover your entire network and have that information is another important vital aspect of data protection and malware mitigation. And same thing, you need reporting to harness the rich network data to gain actionable insights. Because you have this visibility into your network with this best practices, you have the threat intelligence, you have the visibility into infected endpoints, you need to have this solid reporting which will enable you to do all this, because with this reporting capability, with that network discovery that I talked about, you can detect, contextual information is what is that username, MAC address, device name, what is the lease history, and so on, and you integrate all this into a single platform, then you can start predicting what is going to happen, and you can be more proactive about preventing data protection and malware mitigation. Again, the reporting capability will give you all the historical information about what happened, and using that, you can make some predictive, you can do some predictive reports as well to determine what's going to, how you can plan your future. And I talked about that threat investigation tool where you can detect that pretty rapidly using automation to free up security personnel, because you have that contextual information about the blacklisting of certain IP addresses and sites. So why Infoblox? Just from an Infoblox perspective, we protect against DNS exfiltration using machine learning and streaming. We have this consolidated threat intelligence platform. So Infoblox follows best practices. We also integrate all our indicators of compromise as well as our curated threat intelligence using various formats like STIX, TAXI, REST APIs. We integrate with third-party vendors such as Qualys to kick off a scan, for example, when a new device comes on board. And last but not the least is really we have the DNS, DHCP, and IPAM market share. So we know the network context. So we have the actionable network intelligence, and now we are extending that into actionable threat intelligence, and we are enabling data protection and malware mitigation for DNS systems. So, so the next steps, if you want to evaluate our software, we have Active Trust Cloud and Active Trust On-Prem. You can, and also we have PCAP, where you can evaluate our network traffic, packet capture, and we let you know a portion of your traffic we can capture within your organization and let you know if there's any malware present within it. So please engage with Infoblox to discover your security architecture, and then follow up with sales teams for any deep dive on products. But Active Trust is a product you can go and take a look at, both the on-prem and the cloud versions, because you can look at it from a data protection and malware mitigation. We provide both strictly from the cloud, or if you want an on-prem or a hybrid approach, you can use both products. With that, I'll hand it over to you, Lucy.
Thank you so much, Sam. Let's go into the question of this webinar. I have a question from Harry. Regarding threat intelligence, you mentioned cloud computing. Is your contention that cloud computing is generally more secure than managing IT services internally to an organization?
So that's a very broad question, because we provide threat intelligence is usually provided as a service, so it is offered from the cloud. It can be applied to a hybrid situation, whether you have your architecture on-prem or you're completely in the cloud, or if there's a hybrid situation, partly in the cloud and partly on-prem, threat intelligence can be applied. And as I mentioned, it's about applying the curated, validated threat intelligence that's important. It's not about just applying what you subscribe for, but being able to validate that is where where some vendors can play an important role, such as Infoblox, in helping you validate that information and make sure what you're attending to is the most critical threats, and we can help in improving the situational awareness and your overall security posture. Next question.
Any suggestions how to measure cyber resilience?
That's again a broad question. When you say resilience, it's I look at it in terms of security posture. How do you improve your security posture? Meaning, how do you become more resilient to security threats? So these are different buzzwords being used, but typically when you talk about threat intelligence, you talk about in terms of applying the threat intelligence to protect your data and make your company more resilient to attacks. So that's how I look at it, and then improving the situational awareness. So if you practice good hygiene, all the best practices I talked about, when you look at process, make sure there are no silos. You want to try and centralize your threat intelligence. You want to apply, make sure you're not just protecting your web traffic and email traffic. You're also looking at DNS-based threats, or DNS as an important threat vector. You need to protect that. Then I think you're practicing good hygiene and you're improving your cybersecurity resilience as well as your security posture and situational awareness. Next question, please.
Okay, the next question I have here is, you mentioned visibility into network, scans, metrics, packet captures. Should an organization apply security controls equally across mission-critical business systems and non-critical systems, or should a risk-based approach be applied?
So that's a good question. So it's all up to you. What do you deem as most critical and critical or non-critical? So that's something to be determined, and you need to when you have visibility into your network, I think you have to look at it holistically, because you have to look at both critical and non-critical, because you never know when a device comes into the non-critical environment and infects your critical network. So I think you need to look at it holistically. and look at it from exposure perspective. And that's where you can apply the threat intelligence as and when required. Make sure it's validated, make sure it's curated. Like I said, the problem is if you ignore the non-critical, there might be an infection or a malware in the non-critical side that will get to your critical side and badly damage the critical side from a data exfiltration or a damage perspective, causing a lot of financial damage. So my answer to that is you really need to protect both sides and have visibility into both in order to do that. Next question, please.
Okay, we have time for one more. Is malware a Microsoft Windows issue? Is there a real concern that malware for Unix is more recently Linux?
Yeah, so I don't go into that level of detail. I think this is more from a best practices perspective, what you need to do from data protection and malware mitigation. Very specific malware to Windows or Unix, that's a whole different webinar. But I would say, you need to look at it from both ways, because any endpoint that's infected, and if they're using DNS, I'm talking strictly from a best practice and a DNS perspective. So an infected Linux box, Unix box, or a Windows device can propagate or communicate to CMC sites using the DNS control plane. So irrespective of which the endpoint in terms of software, I think you can block it at the DNS. I believe you can block. It's important to block it at the DNS control plane. So it's irrespective of which infection is worse or so on. I think if they're communicating with the CMC sites using DNS, you need to stop that communication at the DNS control plane, and that's what I'm recommending.
Thank you so much, Sam. Let's see, I have time for one more question since we were just a few minutes late. How about DLP tools? To what extent do they help check data filtration?
So that's a good point. So DLP stands for data loss prevention, and that is for data in motion. So, that's sensitive data being sent out, via email and web traffic, and it includes storage information and so on. DLP, again, does not address DNS. It does not protect or prevent data exfiltration using DNS. Yes, it does protect using web traffic and email traffic. Any sensitive data being sent out can be stopped. But so think of this DNS-based data exfiltration or DNS-based data exfiltration prevention as a tool that complements DLP. So you need both. I'm not saying DLP is not required. DLP, just like you have the email gateways, the web gateways, and the next generation firewalls and intrusion prevention systems. These are all essential elements of perimeter security. DLP is required to prevent data loss prevention via email or data in motion, but it does not address DNS-based data exfiltration. So that's why I'm recommending when you look at tools, you need to see something that prevents DNS-based data exfiltration. Good question, though.
Hey, thank you so much, Sam, for that. It looks like we're just about out of time for today. So again, I'd like to thank Sam. Thank you for that great presentation and that very interesting Q&A session. Also, a big thanks to our sponsor, Infoblox, whose support has made it possible for ISACA to offer this event free of charge to our constituents. Don't forget to check out the tabs at the top of your screen to view the presentation slides. This webinar was recorded, so you can go back and watch it from the on-demand program section in your classroom within your My Learning portal. Also, don't forget to register and join us for tomorrow's virtual conference to earn up to 5 free CPE credits. You can learn more by clicking on the link Virtual Conference to the left. Again, I'd like to thank Sam, along with everyone else in our live audience, for your attention and participation. Have a great rest of your day.